Good morning, everyone. It's good to see some of you here. I've had several people that have contacted me in the last day or so that have had other things come up. And we understand that it's an extremely busy time of year, and especially this year with everybody dealing with the pandemic. It's just an unusual year. But we're excited to kick off the year. We have some new members joining us, both our stakeholder committee members, as well as some new staff members at USBE that oversee some of the ESEA programs. So we're happy to have them with us as well. I'm Becky Donaldson. I'm the State Title I Coordinator, and I have the privilege of working with a really wonderful team that oversees a number of the title programs, as well as some state-funded programs that support students who are disadvantaged in some way. So we'll take a few minutes and do some introductions. I'm going to start first, and I'm just looking at my little gallery picture of everybody here, like the Brady Bunch squares, and I'm just going to look at you the way that you appear on my screen and just have you introduce yourself. So I'll start with Sue, my friend Sue Patillo. Sue, you're muted. Can you see your mic icon? It might be down at the bottom of your screen.
Becky, you may be able to unmute her as well.
Becky Peters is hosting, so she may be able to do that.
No, I got it. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Now I just have to get you back on. Oopsie. Okay, go ahead. I'm Sue Patillo, and I am over intervention at Our Lady of Lourdes School.
So I'm really glad Sue could join us representing private schools. They're important partners in this work. So thank you, Sue. Let's go next to Kim Dorr. Oh, you're muted too, Kim.
My screen told me right away. You're muted. Hi, Rebecca and everyone. I'm Kim Dorr. I work with Academica West, and we work with 20 LEAs that are charter schools.
Thank you, Kim. Noelle?
Hi, everyone. I'm Noelle Converse. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Granite School District. Nice to see your faces.
Thank you. It's good to see you. Aaron?
Hi there, Aaron Wilson, also Granite School District. Among other things, I help support Title I planning and spending.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's go to Kim. Well, Kim's USB. I'll come back to you in a minute, Kim. Let's go to Deborah Swanson.
Good morning, I'm Deborah Swanson, and I'm Superintendent of Hawthorne Academies, a public charter school, and it's great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Steve Burton.
Hello, I'm Steve Burton. I'm with the Iron County School District. Great to be here.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see. Okay, we'll go back to USBE. So let's go to Jody Parker.
Hey, I am Jody Parker. I am newly assigned to Title IV Part A. I've been at USB for a little longer, though. I'm over health and PE, and I know some of your names. I email often about health stuff, so it's awesome to see some faces in the LEAs.
Thanks for being here, Jody. Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Fratto. I work at the USBE in special education as the assistant director, and I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you,
A lot of
Kim.
familiar faces.
Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Evans, and I work in school improvement in Becky's department.
Thank you, Leslie. Murray.
Hi, I'm Murray Mazaris. I have several responsibilities with USBE. In this particular case, Title I Part D, which is neglected and delinquent. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, We help youth who are in custody, state custody, to receive an education along with state youth and custody funds.
Thank you, Murray. Cami.
Hello, I'm Tammy Dupre. I'm an educator development specialist here at USBE, and one of my jobs under that title is I coordinate and manage the Title II funding. So I oversee the Title II grant.
Thank you, Cami. Jeff.
Hello, everybody. I am the person overseeing the McKinney-Vento program and the Migrant Ed program at USBE.
Thank you, Jeff. Tammy Long.
Hi, I'm Tammy Long, and I am a compliance manager for the title programs.
Thank you. Cheryl.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Ellsworth. I am the Family and Community Engagement Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education. I am housed under 3 departments, Title I, School Improvement, and Special Education. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Cheryl. Max.
I'm Max Lang. I'm a turnaround school improvement specialist for the board.
Thank you, Max. Robert.
Good morning, Becky. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Palmer. I oversee some state grants. I do the Intergenerational Poverty Grant as well as the Partnerships for Student Success Grant.
Thank you, Robert. Chuck.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Foster, the Title VI coordinator for the USBE and American Indian Education Specialists.
Thank you, Chuck. Val.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Val Murdoch, and I support and monitor Title I programs.
Thank you, Val. Becky Peters.
Yeah, I'm Becky Peters. I'm the secretarial support staff for Becky Donaldson and a few others in the title programs.
Thank you, Becky. Becky's serving as our host this morning. So did I miss anybody? Okay, and I know we have several of our stakeholder participants that have contacted me in the last couple of days, or even one this morning that had to go out to one of the schools to assist with an issue that was taking place. So I want to go now to Tracy Van Deventer. Tracy joined USBE from Ogden School District in mid-July, right in the middle of the whole pandemic, and has been working remotely. I'm so excited that Tracy's here. I've known Tracy for a number of years. She's been a highly successful school and district administrator, and I'm going to let her talk more about herself, but she's going to be doing a really wonderful new center at USBE, and I'd like her to take the time that she would like right now to talk about that.
Very good. I'm so excited to be here. I see some familiar faces and some I have yet to meet. I'm looking forward to it and hoping for green across the state. No more yellow, no more orange. May we be blessed with health and wellness. In that vein, I've been working from home and trying to connect with people. So if I reach out to you to ask you to meet me vicariously through this little screen, thank you for being open and willing. It feels a little bit like I'm a lurking stranger trying to get in, but I appreciate your openness that way. I'm coming from the school setting. I've been a principal at a number of different turnaround schools. I worked at a junior high and a high school level as well. I was at the at the district level, supervising principals. I also was at USBE back when it was USOE, and just glad to be back and glad to jump into the Department for Continuous School Improvement. And our dream, our hope is that we're going to build a center that's going to be supporting growth across all the different schools that are in the state by providing resources and technical assistance. We're in the early stages as we're trying to build some priorities and trying to identify what our greatest needs are at this time. Of course, those schools that have been identified, either in turnaround or CSI or TSI are some of our first levels of support that we realize we need to address. But we want to look at those schools that are also looking to improve simply because they know they have room to grow. And with that in mind, we're going to continue to reach out to you and ask for your feedback and your advice and your continued support in identifying meaningful work that we can do to make sure that what happens with the Center for Continuous School Improvement is work that will support everyone. Becky, that's enough. Again, I might reach out to different people in different veins and try to hear more directly from them, but I'm excited about our meeting today.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And we have several other people that have joined us just in the last minute or so. So Trina, would you take a second and introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Trina Valdez. I'm the State Education Liaison with the Department of Human Services. I advocate for youth in state custody. My position's very interesting because I'm funded by 5 different agencies, including the State Board of Education, Systems of Care, Juvenile Courts, DCFS, and JJS. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for being here, Trina. We also had JM join us from Ogden.
Hi, thanks for inviting me for this team. I'm the Executive Director for Equity and Access for Ogden School District, and I'm proud to say that I was a building administrator in Utah for 24 years, elementary, junior high, and high school.
Yeah, thank you so much, JM. We love having you part of this. Raven.
Hello, my name is Raven Rylander. I was a counselor at Ogden School District. Before that, I was Title I Administrative Assistant to Miss JM. She taught me everything I know. And I have recently moved to Granite School District as a counselor.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here, Raven. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Sterling. Karen, is that you? I can see Karen there.
It's Karen Peterson.
Oh, Karen Peterson, I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. And I am going to be driving in while I'm listening to this meeting, but I wanted to hear what you were saying. So I'm Karen Peterson, the Governor's Education Advisor. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, Karen, thank you for being here. I know how busy you are now and that you're taking over for Tammy, but thank you so much. We are so grateful for everything you do for us. So I think we've got everybody now that I'm seeing so far on the screen. So I'm going to pull up just a few slides that I have to share. I've got like 3 or 4 slides this morning is all, and we'll look at the agenda first. So can you see that?
Uh-huh.
Oh, good. Thanks for letting me know. So this is our ESEA Committee of Practitioners under the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which is currently reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act. There's a provision in there that requires each state education agency to establish a committee of practitioners so that we bring together the USBE specialists that oversee these various title programs with stakeholders from districts and charter schools and private schools, the governor's office, other state agencies, to help us in making the best decisions as we use our funding and leverage resources. So I'm so grateful to every one of you for accepting the invitation to serve on this committee. I know how busy every one of you are. So we'll take a look at our agenda. So we've done introductions. In just a second, I'm going to introduce you to our ESEA National Distinguished Schools for 2020. We're very excited about them and to announce them. We're going to turn some more time over to Tracy, Max, and Leslie to just kind of give you, Tracy's talked a little bit about the center. We'll allow Max and Leslie to take some time and give you some updates on what's happening in the world of state school turnaround, as well as schools that are in for comprehensive support and improvement or targeted support and improvement under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then we have Jeff Ojeda, who, as Jeff said, he is our specialist over both migrant education and the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act program, which is also Title 7B of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Jeff recently did a presentation to the State Board of Education about the number of students in the state of Utah that are experiencing homelessness and some of the services that are available to support those students, as well as what are the requirements for local school districts and charter schools to ensure that those students receive the services that they are eligible for. And then I will provide some information on the CARES Act, the funding that we received from the federal government to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Val Murdoch's also with us today, and Val's welcome to add comments. Tammy Long is helping to oversee the fiscal part of some of those grants, so she's with us as well too. And then we'll wrap up. And if we get finished early, that's a bonus because it's a gift to get some time back during your day. So our two schools that will be honored this year at the National ESEA Conference, that conference will be held virtually this year due to the pandemic in the week of February 8th through the 11th. And every year, each state has an opportunity to send two schools to the conference. So one of the categories is outstanding academic achievement over 2 or more years. So this year, the Academy for Math, Engineering, and Science, which is a public charter school, it's located within Cottonwood High School in Granite School District. That school will be receiving that award, and their principal is Brett Wilson. And they've made it part of their mission to reach out to underserved students, students who have come from refugee families, students who are English learners, and make sure that they have opportunities to engage in rigorous academic coursework, opportunities to engage in robotics competitions and other things like that. So we're very excited to have Ames represent Utah in that category. The second category of schools, and we can only choose two schools each year. There's a category 2, which would go to schools that are doing an exemplary job in closing achievement gaps between student groups. Category 3 is for schools that are doing outstanding work serving specific populations of students. So that might be students who are English learners, students who are homeless, students who are, in a group of students that may have been underperforming. And so this year, our school that will be representing us in that category is Ashley Elementary in Uinta School District. The principal there is Carrie Weldon. And Dr. Christelle Estrada, who is our Title III specialist, and Christelle was not able to be with us today. She had another commitment, but she visited this school and was absolutely impressed with the work they are doing there to support their students who are English learners. So we just want to extend our congratulations out to both of those schools. So I wanted to share that information with you so that you would be aware of that. So at this point in time, I'm going to stop sharing. I can find, oh, it's up here. And I'm going to turn some time over to, again, if Tracy has additional things she'd like to add about the center, as she said, I do know she wants to reach out to many people across the state in various positions, whether they're district administrators, they're school level staff, teachers, instructional coaches. She wants to get a broad representation of people that can help inform what this center develops into. Because right now it's an idea, and it's something that our superintendency has been talking about for a number of years. We're very excited about it and extremely thrilled that we have someone with Tracy's experience to lead that work for us. And I noticed as well, Michelle Eldridge from Provo District just joined. Michelle, would you take a second and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Michelle Eldridge. I'm the Title I and Title III director down in Provo. Sorry, I was late.
Thank you for being here, Michelle. Yeah, Michelle had an emergency at a school earlier this morning, so I'm glad she was able to join. Let me just scan and see if, okay, I think we've got everyone now. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy, Max, and Leslie, and we'll just let you guys provide some updates. If you have questions for this group or things you want this group to help inform, you're welcome to do that.
Well, thank you again for just giving us time to connect with you. We know that there's been quite a disruption in some of our data sources in the last little while, and as we continue to work our way through some of those gaps, we're continually working with the board on trying to find ways to support our schools in reflecting and reviewing the work that we're doing every day. Most importantly, of course, keeping everyone safe and making sure that we continue to engage our students in their learning. And thank you again for allowing me to reach out to you and connect.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, hi everybody. This is Max Lang again. I'll just give you some updates because there have been a flurry of things that have happened since this spring. Something happened this spring. Oh, that's right. We had a pandemic. So there have been a number of things that have impacted school turnaround and school improvement because of those things, and I'll just walk you through some of those. So as you are aware, Utah participates in implementing 2 different school improvement initiatives. One of them is State School Turnaround, which is a state initiative. State School Turnaround identifies schools that in the rank ordered list of points scored through the state accountability system score in that lowest 3% for 2 consecutive years. Those schools are in for 3 years, and to exit State School Turnaround, they must be above the 3% threshold for 2 consecutive years. The other initiative that we implement is school improvement under ESEA, and there are various categories of that. The first one is comprehensive support and improvement for Title I schools. So these are Title I schools who have performed in that cut threshold of Title I schools. They've performed in the lowest 5% for 3 years on average. And to exit after the 4th year, those schools must achieve above the lowest 15% of Title I schools. The second category is comprehensive support and improvement for high school graduation. These are schools that have had a 67% or lower graduation rate for 3 years on average. And to exit those schools in years 3 and 4 of school improvement must have a graduation rate above 67% for those 2 years consecutive. The third category of schools identified for school improvement under ESEA is targeted support and improvement. These are schools who have a student group who has performed at the same level as a 5% cut of all schools. So the schools are rank ordered. Wherever that 5% cut is, if your school has a student group that is performing at or below that cut for 2 consecutive years, the school is identified for targeted support and improvement. And to exit, those schools, that student group must perform above that 5% cut of all schools for 2 consecutive years within the 4 years that they're in school improvement. So those are the initiatives for school improvement that Utah is participating in. So there have been a lot of things that happened in the spring. And Leslie, I'm going to let you take over with this slide to talk about these waivers. And then I'll be here we can do this together.
Okay.
Are you sharing your screen?
I see it.
Yes, I was, but do you see it?
No.
I lost your faces. Okay.
I see a screen that says the Utah's ESEA federal waiver.
Great. That's the screen I wanted to share. So Max went over the categories in review, and hopefully many of you are familiar with that. If you want more clarification, let us know. But some of the updates we provided to new Title I directors and existing Title I directors just recently, and many of you might know that Utah did apply for and get the ESEA waiver, which will extend the funding from, it should have expired on September 30th, 2020, but it's now extended until 21. And it applies to all programs included in the ESEA state plan. Excuse me. And that schools will not be identified. Usually we identify school turnaround schools every year. We won't be doing that, obviously, with lack of the spring assessment data, and nor will we make any decisions or identify comprehensive support and improvement or targeted support and improvement schools. And there is a federal waiver on the website available. So in review, there were a few different extensions. So we wanted to make it clear that those 17 T1SF is what they're called in Utah grants, those did expire September 30th, 2020. The 18 T1SF funds are extended until 21 due to COVID-19, and the 19 T1SF that are active right now expire next September. CSI schools, both in the graduation rate category as well as the overall performance category that Max discussed, will expire. I just want to double check. The next, I can't see. 2022. Sorry, my home office requires overlapping screens. Okay. Any questions on due dates or anything, please let us know or feel free to ask now. But a reminder on the exit criteria, there are some unknowns right now that, 2021 is technically, I'll show you a timeline, so I'm not bumbling over that. But these are the exit criteria. Obviously, with a skipped year, it's going to require some decisions by the board, and we'll communicate those as that comes out. And here's what I was talking about. So in 2021, that should have been the first year of implementation for those CSI schools to begin their plan. And in the end of this year would be year 2. So if the school's in for grad rates, they need 2 consecutive years of being above that 67%. And 2021, as it stands, will count. And 21-22 will be that second year that they need to meet that exit criteria. Now for the Title I schools that were in the lowest 5% of schools, their exit criteria is to be above the 15% of Title I schools as ranked in 21-22. This slide just sort of reviews that. And Max could talk a little bit about the specifics of the cohorts in school turnaround, if that's okay, Max.
You bet. So this has been an interesting spring and summer with regards to exit criteria for schools in state school turnaround. Of the 26 schools that were identified in Cohort 1 in 2015, there were 2 schools that were entering their second year of extension. So the 1920 data would have determined whether those schools exited turnaround in extension or not. One school presented to a state school panel, which I'll talk about here. Cohort 2, there were 5 schools that whose exit criteria was pending the 1920 data. Cohort 3 schools, there are 8 schools that are in a holding pattern, meaning they just would have completed their second year of turnaround in 1920. They will hold in their second year going into 2021. There are 2 schools that were identified in 19 for Cohort 4, and some of their exit criteria is pending. There was legislation passed in the winter session, and HB 420 was passed, and that gave the board some flexibility on exit criteria for cohorts of schools identified for state school turnaround moving forward. So the board and board committee, we've been working with them to make updates and solidify some of that language in the administrative rule, R277920. So let me back up a bit and talk about the cohorts of schools that are still, that were pending exit criteria in the spring of 1920. So we had 2 schools that were in extension from Cohort 1, and we had 5 schools whose exit criteria would have been determined using the 1920 data. So in April, the board waived the exit criteria for state school turnaround and instead directed that a state review panel be formed to review each school's data and make a recommendation to the board as to whether the school demonstrated substantial improvement sufficient enough to exit the program. And the board used 3 questions to guide the state review panel with these presentations. The first was, did the school achieve above the lowest 3% cut, the threshold, using 2018-2019 school accountability measures? So of our 2 schools that were in extension, only one of those from Cohort 1 achieved above the lowest 3% threshold in 18-19. So the other school will continue in a 3rd year of extension, and their exit criteria will be determined after the 2021 school year. Of the Cohort 2 schools, all 5 schools achieved above that threshold in 18-19. So those 6 schools presented to a state review panel, and they presented, based on the board's guiding questions, these 2 things. Can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth in addition to the data in the accountability system? So of those indicators in the state accountability system for elementary schools, achievement, growth, EL progress, growth of the lowest 25%, and for high schools, achievement, growth, EL progress, growth of the lowest performing 25%, and post-secondary readiness. Do they have alternate data that speak to those indicators? The 3rd question that the board provided as a guiding question is, does the school have qualitative and or quantitative data from the implementation of its school turnaround plan that also demonstrates substantial improvement? So each school that's identified for school turnaround has a needs assessment, root cause analysis, and develops a plan with goals and benchmarks that speak to those identified root causes and needs. Could that school, in presenting to the state review panel, demonstrate substantial qualitative or quantitative data towards achieving those goals and benchmarks in their plan? So those 6 schools presented to the state review panel in July, at the end of July. The state review panel provided recommendations that 5 of the 6 schools, the Cohort 1 school was recommended to exit to the board, and 4 of the 5 Cohort 2 schools were recommended to exit. At the September 3rd meeting, the board approved the exit of 5 of those 6 schools. 1 Cohort 2 school will remain in school turnaround for the 2021 school year. Their exit status will be determined at the end of 2021. So having said all that, there's still a lot of unknowns. Pending what happens this year, pending what the accountability system looks like in the spring. And so that's where we are. Cohort 3 schools are remaining. We have 2 newly identified Cohort 4 schools who just completed this fall or in the process of completing their comprehensive needs assessments and root cause analysis. And we'll begin the process of moving forward with their school turnaround experts and developing their school turnaround plans. Now that was a lot. So I will pause for questions or comments or corrections from my colleagues.
There was a question that came in the chat, and just to clarify, this was from Deborah. We did not get scores last year for TSI. Will year 1 be 2021? For the Cohort 3 and Cohort 4, we are waiting for direction from the board regarding the use of this upcoming year's data. So at this point, we're just assuming that we'll be using some spring data to help us with that decision. And it could be similar to Cohort 2, where the board allowed a shift in the way that that exit criteria was identified. And in that case, they allowed us to use the review panel with 3 questions. That's possible for Cohort 3 if we have a year of data this coming spring. But we are waiting to see, and of course the board will have to weigh in and give us direction on that. And not sure if that answers your question, Deborah. And then JM had another question regarding TSI. The identification year considered the first year regardless when the identification, and it looks like we've got a slide to kind of answer how the sequence moved through.
Sorry, Tracy, I didn't mean to just interrupt, but.
No, it's perfect. This is where you take over.
Well, I don't know. But yeah, year 1 is year 1. That's the identification year. Year 3 for that first round of TSI identifications, that the results from this year's summative data should inform progress and exit. But there's a lot of discussion in the assessment realm about growth and skip years and making some of those decisions. And so I'm sorry, the answer continues to be, we're waiting to figure that out and to get advice and input from everyone. And then of course the board's decision, so.
And Leslie, do you have a similar slide that you could put up for Cohort 3? There's a request to clarify identification years for Cohort 3.
Of turnaround?
Yeah. Well, maybe JM, is it TSI or is it turnaround?
TSI?
No, I'm waiting to see from JM. She just said Cohort 3, so I made an assumption it was going to be turnaround.
Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, it is turnaround because I can make sense out of the TSI with the chart. I was wondering for turnaround.
Okay.
Yeah, I did make a few timeline slides, but if you'll excuse me to look for those really quickly. It'll be easier if I'm not like on the spot. I know I have them, but.
I have one that isn't quite as pretty as the one that Leslie has, but let me put up the one I've got right here.
I want to welcome Charlene Louie as well. Charlene joined us, and our wonderful Jerry Record from USBE. He's our fabulous media director.
Are you able to see a Cohort 3 yellow circle?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. So this is general information about the Cohort 3 and the schools that were identified at that time. So they were identified 2018-19. Their first year of being eligible to exit is this coming spring. And they would have to have 2 consecutive years above the 3% of that Title I schools, of all Title I schools. And this is where I was referring to earlier, that the board will have to weigh in if we have data available this spring. Will they allow a shift in that exit standard of 2 consecutive years and do what they did for Cohort 2 and allow Cohort 3 to answer those 3 questions or similar questions? I'm not sure if that helps answer your questions, JM, regarding the timeline. I'm gonna stop sharing and then
Wait,
also maybe,
Sorry.
did you find one, Leslie, the other one with the arrows?
No, because I think you answered her question just fine and that email went out. I do have some timeline slides if people are interested, but turnaround schools, of course, will just need to exceed the 3% for all schools, not just Title I schools.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you for clarifying.
It takes a while. That's okay. Are there any other questions about school improvement? I know there are many rabbit holes we could go down, but for the purposes of this group, we often ask you to weigh in on decisions, and that will be coming soon with some of the funding and input we'll want on that. But.
Absolutely. So today it was more informational, but probably at the next meeting, they will have some things that they'll ask you to provide input and maybe vote on. So
Michelle Eldridge had a question about data, which.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Did you say it scares you?
No, a little bit.
Well.
Then I'll have the answer for you.
I think that's probably valid. Okay. So, okay, I don't know if this is the forum for this. I'm just going to keep asking this in every state situation I can possibly find myself in. Tracy, you responded to an email I started earlier. So it's really difficult to conduct a quality needs assessment and create a school plan when we don't have data quickly and in our hands quickly, like summer quickly to make plans and then allocate funds. I know you all know that. One of my frustrations, I'll be more specific, is about ELs and in particular, the access assessment from WIDA. And, you know, we get the data early in May from DRC. We get a lovely CVS file. We do what we can with that data. And I think in Provo, we're pretty good at analyzing that current data. I have become a little nerdy and learned how to merge data from other years. And so I can measure growth, but I am not nerdy enough or statistician enough to put in the formula for growth because that's pretty complicated. I understand it, but it's a very, I don't know how to do the math of how to figure out if each student made the appropriate growth without going by hand, student by student, and then looking at the chart in the assessment manual and figuring out what year they came in, how they did, and then if they made the adequate growth. My frustration with this is that the state, I'm gonna do this because I hate when people say the district, at the state office. A determination is made based, like currently, we just got an email, a week ago saying we had draft-ish report cards, which the only data available, of course, this year is WIDA Access. So in that report card, it says if a school made adequate growth or not, which is great, but we are not given the data behind that ever. Or unless I nag and nag and nag and nag and nag. And then last year I got it in a form in January. I love the data gateway reports that Anne Michelle and her team, I think, create, and we use those a lot, and those show growth, but again, for individual students. And we love those and use those with our teachers. I guess I'm not understanding the logic and the math behind the state office can publish your growth or not, but they cannot give us the data behind that. Student by student, line by line, it's very frustrating because we can't then kind of pre-know, oh, this school may not make their growth, heads up school, let's make some goals. It's really hard for me to say to a school, oh, gosh, you know, we have one in TSI that this year, according to the report card, is not gonna make their growth. But yet when I did my little what I could to analyze the data, they actually did really good. So anyway, I'm blabbing too much. My point is I don't understand logically how there is a published piece of information on a report card that says you didn't make the growth or you did make growth or this is how much growth you made. But really behind that should be some student by student analysis determining that. So why can't I get that, but I can get the result of that? The end. Sorry, that was a lot.
Do you want me
Yeah,
to
and
take?
well, I responded this morning, and I appreciate you actually going through that, Michelle. I appreciate all the blabbing because I want to understand really the question, and being new in the position, wasn't fully clear on the kind of data that you're asking for. And just a heads up to the others on the call, I copied also Lee Voorhees, who supervises our school support team, and wanting her to weigh in and maybe help us find other ways to get access to that, because we don't know either why it's not available. I don't know anyways. And I think that we all feel, especially you saw in my email, the only data we have right now is this data. So it makes it even more valuable to help us understand, even though it's not for a full group, we at least have some valuable data for an important student group. And let's take advantage of the data that we do have. So feel free to harass Michelle, and you've got my email now, but we do believe that getting data in your hands is important. Unfortunately, we aren't the ones with our fingers on the, on the trigger, so to speak, or fingers on the on button, but we'll continue to work as much as we can, and we're giving you permission to harass us.
Well, I recognize there's the data and assessment department and then IT. And I mean, I recognize that and know you don't have total control. Am I crazy in the logic of that in my head? We can release this, but we can't give you the data behind that. I think I don't know a simpler way to say that. It's so illogical to me.
Yeah. Well,
am I off with that?
I don't think so. And I think that you're asking good questions, that if we can give you a percentage of kids who have made that growth somehow, somewhere, somebody has counted the number of kids individually. So it should be available. And it's one of the kind of, I think, pinch points that we're going to be going through as we create this Center for Continuous School Improvement, is that we have to start getting all of our different kind of divisions, if you will, working together, pushing in the same direction to try and make sure that you've got what you need to be able to do the work that you're doing in the front lines. So absolutely, I don't think that that's unreasonable. I'm not sure if they've responded already to the email and what their responses are going to be, but when we're done with the call, I'll track it down a little more and try and get back to you. I don't think it's unreasonable, but Leslie, Max, and Becky, feel free to pipe in if you think I'm crazy.
Well, like Dora just said, we've been asking this question a long time, and I feel I've only been at the USB for 2 years, but I feel your pain, and then feel some growth in the direction where we've sat down and talked about a data dashboard that's much more interactive and in real time and displayed through Tableau, which would, I think, do exactly what you want it to do, Michelle. And then we come to stops and things, disagreements between IT and data and statistics, or et cetera. So we value your input on this, and then we can say it's not just us who wants this, it's our stakeholders.
Yeah.
People who want to use data to improve student outcomes want this information. So we invite it, and I know it's frustrating, and we feel your.
I have been asking for at least 5 years. And I eventually got it last year for the first time ever. I think, honestly, Anne Michelle made it for me, and she bugged somebody enough to just get it to me. But anyway, it's so illogical to me to say, you didn't make the growth, here's your percentage, but we can't. I just cannot wrap my brain around, like, isn't that just a CVS file you just send us? Like, it's just, I know that's probably more complicated than that, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and Michelle, I think it's about harvesting the data. So maybe we just have to look at how we're using people, and maybe there's another way we could find, instead of having Anne Michelle try to do it individually, maybe there's a way we could find a tool or a way we can embed that into our process. Mm-hmm. Keep harassing us.
Yes, that's why one reason this committee is so critical to our work, because you really do help inform us, and you give us the information and feedback that we need to take, out to other departments in the agency, to leadership. And I do think they're working on the dashboard. I don't know where that's at in the stages of development, but I do think it's something that they are working on. We've had the same questions you've had as well for a number of years. So keep your questions coming. Don't hesitate to email us, to call us, bring things up at this committee, and we can certainly arrange at our next meeting, perhaps to have Darren Nilsson, who's our Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning and is directly over the Assessment and Accountability Department. Anne Michelle Neal is our Accountability Specialist. Erin Bruff, who's our Data and Statistics Coordinator for the state. We can certainly make arrangements to bring them into this meeting, and, so you can ask the questions directly of them and have them prepare and share and provide updates. I think it's really important that we keep everyone in the loop.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, so Leslie, Max, and Tracy, do any of you have anything else you'd like to share, or before we move on?
No, but thanks also for Kim Dorr, who's willing maybe to keep harassing us too. So we love hearing from you in the field, because that gives our request more power and punch as we make those requests, when they know that there are people in the field who are really using this data. So we appreciate when you do reach out and let us know that this is a need you have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tracy and Max and Leslie, for sharing with us this morning and providing those important updates about, where we're at with all these various school improvement efforts and helping inform things as we move forward with the center. Tracy had mentioned in the chat box, in a response to a question that Murray had, that we're working with WestEd and the Region 15 Comprehensive Center, which is a part of WestEd. Utah is part of that region. And so their mission is to serve states within their regions. They are funded through the federal government to provide support to states and LEAs. So we're currently working on them to put together a logic model for how this center is going to work. And at some point in time, we'll want this group's input into that work. A couple of other things I'll just mention that we are working with them on. A couple of years ago, a group of us across the USBE got together and we were talking about all of the different plans that LEAs and schools are required to do. Because of various federal or state programming. They have to do multiple needs assessments, multiple plans, and how that becomes a burden, especially on our smaller districts and our charter LEAs who, have limited staff to do all of this work. So we started talking about that, and then the legislative auditors from the legislature came in and did an audit, and I think they reached out to stakeholders. They interviewed a lot of people at the agency and produced a report to the legislature indicating that there's a need for some things to be collaborated on so that we can reduce that burden on planning and doing needs assessments and reporting. So where we're at with that work right now, Darren Nilsson is working with a team of people from the agency, as well as a variety of stakeholders. Some of you are involved in that work. JM is, and maybe some of the rest of you are. Well, what we started with is looking across the state agency at not just federal programming, but also all the state programming, and looking at how we might create a comprehensive needs assessment that would fulfill the needs of these multiple programs. So we're working on that right now with WestEd and the Region 15 team to do that. And so we have some level of involvement right now from LEA representatives. We'll be rolling it out to a broader group for feedback as we move on. But we're sort of in the process with that right now, and that's a priority that we're working on. And we hope that will reduce burden. Another thing that we're working on with the Region 15 Center is under the Every Student Succeeds Act, there's a provision in there that requires LEAs that have multiple schools that are involved in various levels of school improvement to engage in a resource allocation review. So it looks at funding that's being provided to schools and what the results are as far as student outcomes, but it also looks at human resources, human capital, various levels of support that LEAs are providing to those schools. So we're in the process of developing that as well. We hope to have something ready to pilot in the spring. So we'll come back to this committee at another meeting as we develop that out a little bit further. And we'll ask 2 or 3 LEAs that are willing to kind of help us pilot that process. It's not meant to be an evaluation of LEAs. It's not to be a hammer. It's just strictly kind of a collaborative look at what's happening in our schools that are the most needy schools, the most at risk, and how we can leverage our resources, fiscal and human resources, to provide the level of support that our schools need. So as Tracy and others in the agency start working on the development of this center, you know, we view those kind of things as some of the levels of support that we can provide for all LEAs and all schools, that everyone is engaged in a continuous improvement process, not just focusing on those schools that have been identified under state or federal law as being an improvement, but we're all in improvement, including us as a state agency. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Does anyone have questions about any of those things?
We want to just celebrate that Deborah Swanson is also serving on that committee with JM and appreciate their willingness to help us.
Yeah, we have some great LEA representatives that are attending those virtual meetings and providing feedback and input about what should be included, how should that be worded, how frequently should that needs assessment take place. We're very excited about it and think it's going to be a wonderful support to our LEAs as we move forward. So thank you for your service. Oh yes, go ahead.
This is Kim. I just so appreciate how your office in particular is so great at collaborating and reaching out to help schools and individuals. I would make a comment that I thought that Utah Grants was going to sort of solidify some of that together. And it doesn't seem like that's going that direction. More and more things are now being done as a separate plan or in Qualtrics or someplace else. So I don't know if that committee is going to look at that, or if that's a separate entity as to kind of the goal of Utah Grants and how it might not be going in the right direction.
Thank you, Kim. That's really important as well. I appreciate you bringing that up, because we have had internal talks about, you know, in the Utah Consolidated Application, there was a way for LEAs to look across their funding streams, to set goals, and then to leverage funding across those streams. And Utah Grants, as you're saying, Kim, has divided everything up into a separate application, a separate budget. But we've had some talks. There is a provision in the Every Student Succeeds Act for LEAs to consolidate their funds, to leverage those funds across programs. And in doing so, it provides some real benefits to LEAs, because as they consolidate that funding, for example, if they consolidated their federal funding, they can use that funding flexibly as long as they're providing services that fall under those federal grant programs. If they also consolidate some of their state level funding, then they no longer have to do time and effort reporting. I mean, there are some real benefits, and it reduces burden and it reduces paperwork. So we have a number of LEAs, and I know Ogden is an example of this right now, as Provo is, that are braiding their funding together at a local level and working with school principals as they allocate funding to those schools, helping principals make wise decisions about what they're going to spend that money on, and looking at the needs of the schools. Like Michelle is saying, if she had a way to really look more deeply at the English learner data from the WIDA Access, that would help her in supporting those individual schools as they make their plans. So we're looking to, at some point in the future, have a function like that programmed into our grants management system. We've talked to the state of Georgia. They have that function in place, and they started out with a small pilot of 3 or 4 districts, and every year they built that. And after 2 or 3 years, they had really large systems in, like Atlanta Public Schools, for example. And they love it. They've brought panels of people to the national conference who have presented and talked about, you know, if you have a program director at the LEA level and they're supporting Title I and Title III, and, you know, in some cases they're also supporting, you know, maybe special education in small LEAs, they are able to consolidate those funds, then, you know, it reduces all that burden of saying, oh, I spent 20% of my time on this project, and I spent 40% of my time on this one, and this percentage of my time coming out of this one. So there are some tremendous benefits. This year, due to the pandemic and, you know, budget cuts at the state level and, you know, trying to prioritize funding going out to LEAs, there was not money at USBE to pay for the programming with the vendor that would require. But it is on our to-do list, and our grants management team is very willing and very interested in doing that. It's just a matter of getting to a point where we have some funding available to do it. But there are real tremendous benefits to that. Anyone else have questions or comments that they'd like to make before we move on? Okay, with that, I'm going to turn the time over now to Jeff Ojeda, and he's going to share some information about the homeless students in our state. And when Jeff first shared this information with me a while ago, it was so sobering. It was just heartbreaking as I thought about how many students in our state are experiencing homelessness and the needs that they have and the services that they need. So Jeff, thank you for being here this morning and for your willingness to share.
Absolutely. Thanks, Becky. And hello again to everybody. I'll sharing screen here with you, so bear with me 1 second as I do. The purpose of McKinney-Vento is really to support students that are in a homeless situation. And the McKinney-Vento Act itself was ratified in 1987. It is a federal law, so it sits outside, both inside and outside of educational law. And that's important to know because the services that are required to be given for homeless students not just sit in education, but outside as well. And so it's important to recognize that for our LEAs to be able to understand that as well. So in the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESEA, you know that was ratified in 2016, but actually the portion of McKinney-Vento happened in 2015. So it was the only portion of the legislation that both sides of the aisle agreed on and wanted to put forth before any other part of ESEA was signed. So it's important to recognize that as well. It is something that is bipartisan and something that everyone agrees on. It provides formula grants to states. It happens on a 3-year cycle. And we here in Utah offer 12 grants to different LEAs under that grant cycle. So this is our last year of the 3-year cycle. And so applications for the new cycle will be available in this coming April, and they'll be due in June. They'll be read and scored, and then allocations will be granted out in July. of the coming year. Sorry, I gotta move some things around on my screen here because I see you guys, but I don't see what I'm supposed to be talking about. Sorry about that. So according to the law, the ESEA has a responsibility that they have someone in a leadership role at the ESEA, the state education agency, that looks over McKinney-Vento and that has sufficient time to do that. So that's why I'm not a full-time person in McKinney-Vento. Though I am the McKinney-Vento person, I am a half-time person. My time is split between McKinney-Vento and Migrant Ed. Okay. Again, the ESEA must ensure that McKinney-Vento students receive the full protections and services provided by the law. That is in statute. It also requires that LEAs get monitored. And with COVID going on, we actually got some okays to not do that this past year because of the situation that was happening. We gather homeless data, and I'll share some of that with you today. And we collaborate with you as educators in your districts and charter schools, and in some cases even private schools. But we also are required to work with community organizations and policymakers to ensure that our homeless students have the best and most accessible education that they can given their circumstances. And it doesn't mean that they are provided anything above the law. It just means that they are receiving equitable services under the situations that they're living. So every LEA must designate a person who identifies McKinney-Vento students, and that is the McKinney-Vento liaison. So if you are a district, chances are that you have a person in your federal programs office that oversees McKinney-Vento. If you are a charter school and you are the federal person, chances are that's you, even if you don't know it. Surprise, surprise. But there, by law, must be someone who is overseeing McKinney-Vento in every education agency. Okay. That requires also that districts post public notice of McKinney-Vento rights to students and parents in accessible places. So in common places in school areas, at the district office, any place where parents and students might congregate or kind of spend some time in, there should be some notification of McKinney-Vento services and what's available to them or who to contact in that situation. And in the past, and we still do, connect with an organization that actually prints out flyers and posters that we can get to you. So if you like some of those, please feel free to get in touch with me. And I'm happy to collect some of those for you and get them to you. Okay. And then the other piece is that I often get asked is how far is the role and responsibility of the LEA and the liaison to help students that are in a homeless situation. McKinney-Vento is specific to academics, and so it's ensuring or it ensures that students continue with as uninterrupted as possible education as they can, given their circumstances. But as you can imagine or you're well aware of, homeless students oftentimes have issues that go beyond education. The role of the liaison is to put that student and families in contact with community services and health organizations that may help. But that is the extent of the relationship required under the law. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have liaisons who go above and beyond that. We certainly do, and I see it on a regular basis. Just all across the state, we have fantastic people who are our liaisons and really go above and beyond to serve our kids. But the reality is that the requirement under the law is that you refer families and students to services that can help support them outside of the school if need be. And who qualifies or who's eligible for McKinney-Vento is often the question that comes up, and situations vary. So let me give you the kind of the short version of what that definition is. The part that we latch onto when we talk about who is and who isn't McKinney-Vento is this first bullet here, and that is that children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence are considered McKinney-Vento. But under that, there are specific requirements as well. So sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or disaster, natural disaster, all of those qualify as a student or family for McKinney-Vento. If they're living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds, due to lack of an alternative adequate accommodation, they meet the definition of McKinney-Vento. If they are doing that solely because it's their choice, or they're building a house and have to get out of their old place and need to spend a few months in a hotel while their new home gets finished, that does not qualify them as McKinney-Vento. It must be due to lack of an alternate adequate accommodation, and it must be due to an economic hardship. Okay? And sometimes that can be confusing for folks because they hear, oh, well, they're in a hotel, so they automatically qualify. And that's not necessarily the case. Something else to consider is that if a family or a student is living in emergency or transitional housing, they qualify. If they're living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, any place that isn't meant to be lived in, they qualify as McKinney-Vento. And if they're living in a place, but it is substandard, and by that means that the utilities aren't available, or there are infestations, or there's tons of mold, or there are dangers living in that place, like their roof is falling apart, that kind of thing, that also qualifies students as McKinney-Vento. I've added a link here to determining eligibility. It's a short brief, but it's a good one. So if you're more interested in finding out about identifying students and their situations, then I refer you to that link. And then the last part of what we need to discuss in terms of eligibility is unaccompanied youth. Students, a child or youth who meets the definition and is not physically in the custody of a parent or guardian. Again, that's something that comes up often because we have lots of kids who come from other places to study here in Utah, or come here to Utah to play sports. That happens quite frequently, both international kids and kids from other states, especially with how things are going now with the pandemic. There are schools in their states that aren't doing any sports whatsoever, and their families want them to play sports, so they're sending them to Utah with friends or family. If it is a long-term choice that the family is making to send their child, and they have a regular, fixed, adequate nighttime residence, then they do not qualify as McKinney-Vento. We're only looking at students that are in dire situations, that are in emergency situations, and that are really homeless, not on their own because they're living with family or friends. Any questions about that before I continue? Because that might bring up some situations that some of you may be aware of or have questions about.
Well, Jeff, there was a comment in the chat that talked about a great flow chart that you have that's been really helpful in identification process, and maybe when you finish you could put a link to that resource in the chat for others to use.
Yeah, I know which flow chart that person's referring to. So yeah, I'll do that. I'll also send it to Becky Peters so that she can email that out to everybody, and they can get that as well. Okay. Again, the purpose of McKinney-Vento is to remove barriers, and we're talking specifically academic barriers for students that are in a homeless situation. So that also includes fee waivers, and that's an important topic that came up recently, particularly at the start of this year, where we had plenty of districts, school staff, not district personnel, but school staff, who kind of gave some pushback on waiving fees for McKinney-Vento students. The law is very specific, and If a student has been designated and determined that they meet the definition of McKinney-Vento, then they automatically qualify for free and reduced lunch, and they automatically qualify for the removal of outstanding fees or fines. And that also includes absences. So if you have kids that are considered homeless, considered McKinney-Vento, but they go past the 10-day absentee limit for your district, or whatever that number might be, they should not be removed from your roles. What should be happening is that your liaison or your designated person to oversee McKinney-Vento should be actively seeking out that student to determine why they're not attending school. Remember, the key here is that we want kids to continue academically, and sometimes school is their only stable environment when they're in a homeless situation. So it's critical that that contact be made, and then a determination can be made of what really is the student's situation. So here in Utah, our graduation rate for our McKinney-Vento students, this is for the 1920 year, was 69% as compared to 87%. Oh, excuse me. Oh no, I read that right, sorry. So yeah, all students are 87%. Homeless students were 69%. In terms of SAGE testing for the 2017-2018 year, you can see our McKinney-Vento students are slightly lagging, slightly behind, both in English and math. What might be of greater interest to you, if that hasn't been so far, is our 15 LEAs with the highest McKinney-Vento identification. So we do include charter schools on our list, and no charters are in the top 15, but we do have many charter schools that have McKinney-Vento students that have been identified. But sometimes people are often surprised by the order of the districts here in terms of numbers. And this is for numbers for the 1920 year last year. People are always interested in looking at the makeup of McKinney-Vento students. And so here you have a listing by ethnicity as well as by subcategory of students. So you can see that the largest population of McKinney-Vento students is actually Caucasian, not Hispanic, as sometimes people tend to think. We do have quite a few EL kids that meet that definition, special needs, but obviously the highest is going to be our SES kids, our Title I kids who really need the support. And again, these are numbers for the 1920 year last year. And so 11,576 is the number of students that we could identify in the state that met the definition of McKinney-Vento. We know there are more. In some cases, for last year, our district numbers went up significantly because of what was going on with the pandemic. In others, students didn't want to be recognized or identified with school at all. And so they started to disappear from our view as an LEA. So we know that there are more students out there, but last year the identification number was 11,576 kids living in homeless situations, according to the McKinney-Vento definition. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that you may have, but that's all the time that I'm going to take for a presentation. Okay, well, I guess I'll turn the time back to Becky then. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, everybody. Becky, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, Jeff recently worked with Jeff Van Hulten, who works for the board, in updating the board rule for students who are experiencing homelessness. And one of the things that they made sure that they, had specifically in that rule was dealing with the issue of fee waivers. So that rule is updated and reviewed every 5 years and kept in place. Trina's asking about the presentation. Jeff, you're willing to share that with us, I'm assuming.
Yes, I've already sent it to Becky Peters earlier this morning, so I know that she plans on getting it out to everybody.
Okay, great. So we'll get the slides out that Leslie and Max shared, Tracy, Jeff. We'll make sure that you get all of that information that's been shared today.
Yep, and I'll make sure to get the flow chart out to Becky as well, just in a minute.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate that. So I'm going to share my screen again for just a minute and call this PowerPoint back up. And let's talk for a minute about the CARES Act. So in March, on March 13th, the president declared a national emergency. And Congress put together the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And part of that CARES Act had provisions for higher education and public education. So Utah received 2 different allocations of funding under the CARES Act, specifically for education. One of them is the Elementary Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund, which we refer to as ESSER. And USBE received around $68 million for that. And the way that funding worked, 90% of that funding had to be allocated out to local education agencies based on the percentage of their 2019 Title I Part A funds. And so what this meant is LEAs that were not eligible for Title I funding, or brand new charter LEAs that were just opening and didn't have Title I in 2019. And we have a few LEAs in the state who waive their Title I-A funding each year. So what that meant is those LEAs, because they did not receive any Title I funding in 2019, then they were not eligible for part of that 90% of the ESSER funds that were allocated to USBE. The state was allowed to reserve 10% to use at the state level. So what the State Board of Education decided was that for all those LEAs that did not receive Title I money, and the LEAs that had ESSER funding that was less than $21,000, they would award each of those LEAs a base amount of $21,000. So for an LEA that didn't receive Title I, they would get that minimum $21,000 allocation. If there were LEAs that have a small percentage of Title I funds, so say under the 90% allocation, that LEA received $6,000, or maybe they received $14,000. Then from that 10% state set aside, they brought those LEAs up to that $21,000 minimum allocation. They also used some of that state set aside money to purchase personal protective equipment, sanitizer wipes, hand sanitizer dispensers, and masks, things like that that were distributed out to all of the LEAs during the summer months. In addition to the ESSER funds that USBE received, the governor's office received approximately $29 million for the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And the governor had options of whether that funding was allocated to public education or higher education or a combination. And so the governor's office worked closely with our office, with higher education, and they determined that the money should go to public education. So that money was also is also running through the USBE, through the Utah Grants Management System. And LEAs received another allocation through that GEAR funding. And the focus of the governor's funding is serving students who are at risk, academically at risk, and students with disabilities. So they looked at the categories of eligible students under the state Education for At-Risk Students, the EARS funding, and that's how they determined how that funding was allocated to LEAs. Under federal education programs, there is an equitable services requirement, and that applies both to the title programs and to the special education programs under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. In the CARES Act legislation that Congress put forth, it states that local districts, public school districts, should provide equitable services to private nonprofit schools in the same manner as under Section 1117 of ESEA. And what that is the Title I Equitable Services provisions. Because Title I funding is allocated to LEAs based on poverty that comes from the United States Census Bureau, LEAs receive Title I money then to serve, it's based on their poverty. It's not based on every student in a public district. It's based on the percentage of children ages 5 to 17. Those are considered school-age children by the federal government who are living in low-income families. And that's how the CARES Act money was allocated to the states to allocate to the districts. So once again, districts received their CARES Act funding based on their poverty level, not on all students within the local education agency. The Department of Education under Secretary DeVos interpreted the CARES Act in a different manner. And so what Secretary DeVos said when the CARES Act funding became available was that the public school districts needed to provide services to every student in private nonprofit schools that were within the local district's boundaries, not based on the number and percentage of students that come from low-income families and would attend a Title I school if they went to their neighborhood school. And so that created a lot of confusion across the nation, and as a result of that, there were a number of lawsuits filed against Secretary DeVos and the Department of Education because states and districts were saying, you know, we received this money based on the percentage of students that we have that are from low-income families, not based on all students. So to be equitable, we should then in turn provide equitable services to those students who are attending a private nonprofit school. So as I said, there were several lawsuits. Utah did not join in any of those lawsuits, but there were a number of states and some large school districts, large school systems across the country that did participate in those lawsuits. So the first lawsuit that was settled and was in the state of Washington, but the judge in that case said this only applies to Washington state. So the way that the Department of Ed interpreted the CARES Act is not in effect in Washington state. So because of this confusion, Secretary DeVos put out what she called an interim final rule. And typically when the Department of Education wants to put in a new regulation, they have to publish it in the Federal Register. Typically it's published and open for public comment for a period of 90 days. What the secretary chose to do was they wrote this interim final rule. She published it on the Department of Ed website on July 1st. And she said this rule has the force of law. So districts were then advised, do not follow the Title 1A methodology for determining equitable services. You have to follow this interim final rule, which says you have to base the equitable services provision for all students in the private schools within your districts, if those private schools chose to participate. Well, one of the final lawsuits was NAACP versus DeVos, which was filed in the courts, the federal courts in Washington, D.C. In that court, the judge ruled and provided an opinion stating that Secretary DeVos and the United States Department of Education had overstepped their legal authority in the way that they interpreted the CARES Act that had been written by Congress. And so that judge vacated the interim final rule that is no longer in effect across the entire nation. And so then it reverted back to the Title 1A methodology, which is found in Section 1117. So in that situation, as I said, the local public school district reaches out and consults with the private schools that are eligible. They have to be nonprofit private schools. They consult, they determine if the private school wants to participate in equitable services, and then they base that on the number of students from low-income families that reside within the boundaries of a public school that is receiving Title I funding. And those students that are attending the private school then determine how that equitable services share should be calculated. So there was a lot of back and forth. Utah received its CARES Act funding on May 26. We worked very quickly to get that funding out to our LEAs. So originally they were told to follow Section 1117. Then in July, the Department of Ed put the final rule in place where they were told, no, you have to follow the rule now and you have to calculate it this way. And now, starting on September 4th, it goes back to Section 1117. So it's been a bit confusing for people, but our public districts have been very responsive, and they've done a wonderful job in reaching out to private schools within their districts and working collaboratively with them to determine what services those private schools needed. And in many cases, the private schools reached out and said, we really need help purchasing PPE. We need masks for our students and teachers. We need additional cleaning supplies. We need additional support. Maybe they needed devices so that their children had opportunities if they had to engage in remote learning. So I think in Utah, we've done a good job. We've tried to just follow whatever the current law told us to do. Our district LEAs, as I said, have been good partners and reaching out and working collaboratively with our private schools. But I just wanted to provide you with an update on that. If Congress passes an additional relief act, which, that's been on and off for the past several months, and the House puts out a version, the Senate doesn't agree. There's been a lot of back and forth arguing, but I think, they do realize that there is additional needs across the nation for businesses, for employers, for individual families that are suffering under this pandemic, as well as for all of our schools, both public schools and private schools, because everyone's been impacted by the pandemic. It doesn't discriminate based on any category. I mean, we're all impacted in numerous ways. So we're hoping that when they get another package put together, they'll address, some of these issues. There will be additional funding for both public and private schools in that package. And I know various versions have gone back and forth, and it's just a matter of how much money will be there and how they choose to allocate it, and what parameters they put around it. But even though the CARES Act funding was allocated out to states and local education agencies based on poverty, it can be used very flexibly. There were over 12 different types of ways that LEAs could use that funding. So if they needed to use funding to keep staff employed that may have been at risk of losing jobs due to the pandemic, due to budget cuts, many LEAs had tremendous needs starting last spring, over the summer, and continuing this year for additional computers and servers, and making sure that students had access to Wi-Fi that had, a strong enough signal to allow them to engage in video conferencing, to be able to participate in Zoom meetings, additional protection for teachers. So districts had a very large latitude, and local education agencies, including our charter schools, had a great deal of flexibility in how they needed to use that funding. And they're able to use that funding, even though our funding came to Utah on March, I think it was May 26th, is when we were able to send that money out to LEAs. The funding can be used to cover expenses due to the pandemic back to March 13th of this year, which was the date the national emergency was declared. And the funding is available through September 30th of 2022. And I know some LEAs have expended quite a bit of their funding already, especially those LEAs that have received small amounts of funding, because they've had so many needs and have had so many things they've been trying to respond to quickly. So what questions do you have about the CARES Act that I can answer at this point in time? Okay, it looks like there are no questions. So it looks like we're going to give you back a few minutes of your morning, which is, like I said, is a bonus because everyone is so busy. And I know you're involved in so many meetings, whether those are face-to-face, if you're in a situation where you're able to do that safely, or virtual meetings. Oh, and before we go, I noticed that Kim Herrera joined us. Kim, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? Kim is a member.
Thank you for having me today. Kim Herrera, I'm a school counseling program specialist at the Utah State Board of Education. I actually share this role with my colleague Jerry Sagers, and we divide our responsibilities pretty much through from elementary, and I do secondary. So glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kim. We appreciate her for joining us, and I hope I didn't miss anyone else. Charlene, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, Charlene Louie, the Director of Educational Equity in Granite School District, and have the opportunity to be on this committee. So thanks again, Rebecca, for allowing me to join you again this year.
Thank you, Charlene. So I just want to thank you all again, especially to those of you that are new, for your willingness to accept invitations to serve. And I'm so glad that Jody and Cammie were able to join us this time for Title 4A and Title II. We look forward to collaborating with them and having them, present in the future if they have things that they can share. So we will get out all the PowerPoints and Jeff's flow chart. I don't know if Becky was able to host the meeting and also take minutes, but we'll make sure that we get all that information out to you. And what we'll do is send out kind of a poll to find out a date for our next meeting that works best for everyone. So I wish you all a wonderful day. I want you all to stay safe and healthy and well. And I appreciate everything you're doing on behalf of our wonderful students and educators in Utah. Thank you and have a wonderful day.